Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guests today are Dave Boucher from the Tennessean and Carrie Wade Gervin from the Nashville scene. We're talking about a very busy period on Capitol Hill at a time when it's not usually very busy up there. One of the things that happened, Carrie, this year was we had a special session that was kind of came out of the blue. Apparently lawmakers had passed a DUI law that almost cost the state $60 million in federal transportation monies. How could that happen? Why was there no conversation? It passed both houses, all the committees. It was signed by the governor, and the feds didn't raise any concern about it violating their their policies until after it was passed. It was just a complete
yeah. It is still confusing to me and other reporters that I've talked to. This bill was originally filed in 2015, so it was out there. There was a fiscal note on the bill, as I understand it, compiled in 2015. At the time, there were concerns about pressures on the staff reviewing fiscal notes. Speaker Harwell says that those concerns were totally addressed in time for the 2016 session, but how they made that almost $60 million mistake is.
Dave, there is a policy up there, a procedure they go through where they review the fiscal costs of these, and this should have shown up there somehow, I would have thought. Does the system not work?
One would imagine that would show up. I mean, there have been questions about the fiscal note policy at the legislature for a long time, whether or not it's political or whatever you want to say. I do think it's worth noting the federal government is not monitoring every bill that's coming up in Tennessee or in every other state. They tend to see a bill after it's been passed and look at the possible ramifications. I believe in either annual or relatively regular reviews.
But the fiscal staff perhaps should have looked at it and asked that question to the feds because they were making a change in a law that they knew the feds would have an interest in.
I would imagine that feds have a lot of interest in every law that's passed in Tennessee. They're just not monitoring it at the same time. I can't say who actually should have reviewed that. Clearly, there were mistakes made by multiple people in this case.
And we talked about earlier about some of the lawmakers that were not identified directly in the Attorney General's report. One of them was mentioned was Speaker Beth Harwell. She is one facing re-election in November. She beat Democrat Chris Moth, who's going against her again this time 2 years ago, beat him pretty handily. Carrie, is there a reason to believe this rematch is going to be any closer than it was 2 years ago?
I do know that House Democrats think they can pull off a huge upset. I was talking with a couple of people last night that supposedly have seen some kind of polling that say that it's a closer race than many of us think. But I also, it just seems unlikely. Harwell is such a well-known figure. She has so much money in the bank with a month to go running ads. She's refused to do any kind of candidate forums with Moth that might lead to any kind of damaging conversations, and I do think she will win easily.
Dave, you have any thoughts about that particular race?
It's pretty tough to unseat the Speaker of the House and the longest-serving member of the House of Representatives, regardless of whether it's a Republican or Democratic district. It's in any case, regardless. Clearly, the Speaker has faced a lot of challenges this year. Still going to be an uphill battle for Mr. Moth.
Another challenge that she'll face if and when she comes back is a challenge for her speakership from one of her other members, Jimmy Matlock. A few weeks ago, he claimed in the media he has 7 more votes in the caucus than she does. How do you two see those races, and what are Matlock's chances?
Matlock doesn't have the votes. He didn't show up for special session. He didn't vote for Durham's expulsion. He does not have the votes.
Dave, is this an outgrowth? Is his candidacy an outgrowth of how she handled the Durham affair? Because some members of the caucus seem to indicate they didn't like what she did.
So he'll tell you. He's told me that it is not, and that he's tried not. He said it's not good to, I think, Monday morning quarterback or whatever the terminology he used was to look at her handling of the case. At the same time, she talked a lot about transparency in the caucus and about caucus members wanting to know what leadership is doing and about leadership not pushing bills that caucus members want. So I definitely think that, and this is not new to anybody that's been following this, there are certainly factions within the caucus. Republicans will try to downplay that, but there are certainly factions within the caucus that might be a little bit more conservative or a little bit more outspoken. And I think that this is just a natural outgrowth of a supermajority where there are certain pockets of people that just don't agree with the current leadership structure and the way that Republican leaders are handling the decisions in the House.
Let's take a break. We're talking with Dave Boucher, the Tennessean, and Kerry Wade Gervin in the Nashville scene about some of the big issues going on Capitol Hill in Nashville during the summertime and the fall when normally the legislature is not even here at all. Back to continue our conversation after this break.